How are you, Alperin? Sir, it was wonderful. Seeing you all made me feel even better. We're waiting with excitement. How nice, how nice. Yes, good evening to everyone. Hello, good evening, sir. How wonderful it is to be with you on such a lovely evening. What did they say? The most beautiful rose is the one that blooms in spring. The best friend is the one whose loyalty lasts long. The most special person is the one who greets you when you least expect it. I want to start this evening with positive energy by saying greetings to all of you who are as beautiful as a rose. And today, let us intend for beautiful knowledge to flow into our minds, our bags, and our souls. Let us intend to go beyond just knowing, to truly understand. Let us go beyond understanding and reach true comprehension. May it be a beautiful night for all of us, one in which we can truly comprehend the knowledge we receive. The journey never truly ends. A person's journey of learning continues endlessly. That is why the Sufis have always seen the path itself as the teacher. It is never a destination to be reached. They have always spoken about the value of the journey itself. That is why notice that there are always sayings about the path. Set out on the path, and the path will reveal itself to you. Set out on the path, and the path will be opened. They have said things that summarize the journey, like don't worry about where the end of the road leads, and have motivated people about the path. As long as we live, we will always be travelers. Of course, we will reach certain places and gain specific expertise. We will acquire certain abilities. While teaching what we have learned, we will also continue on our own journey at the same time. Not only will our learning never end, but this is perhaps one of the most beautiful things in life. It will be sharing what we have learned so far with those who are trying to learn. In fact, that's how my own journey began. In my quest that started at a young age, I set out with the enthusiasm to teach everything I learned. Even when I was 15, I used to share what I learned with the kids around me. I tried to explain things to the people who came to visit us too. Of course, back then I didn't have many listeners. Most of the time they would get bored as well, but I always made this a principle for myself. I set it for myself almost like a rule, one by one. If something is good for me and I have learned it, then what I need to do in return is to share it. Everyone's way of sharing can be different. Some people can explain it better in a seminar hall. Some can express it more beautifully in front of a screen. Some put it into writing, some turn it into music, some are better one on one, some touch people's hearts one on one. Semal, for example, might be able to reach them better that way. But all of us need to adopt this basic philosophy in life. Not to take, but to give. Because the more we give, the more we receive. But this giving is not about giving away yourself. It's about sharing what you've learned, giving what you've learned. Because what does Sham say? He says, if your heart changes, the world changes. Today we will also look at life coaching. We will examine both the basic system of life coaching and its equivalent in our own culture. We will make a comparison because, as you know, the term life coaching has started to become popular around the world in the last 100 years. And it's a system that, in a way, became popular under the leadership of America. In fact, helping people, coaching people, is something that has existed for tens of thousands of years. Wise people have always done this anyway. But what does the capitalist system do in particular? The capitalist system turns this into a system. In other words, it presents this as a system to others. Now, in our Anatolia, what was the general system in our tradition of wisdom? It was the master-apprentice relationship, the foundation of the master-apprentice relationship. Its methodology is to provide an educational system tailored to the apprentice. In other words, you understand the apprentice, what they can do, what they can't do, what they will understand, what they won't understand. It's a perfect system. I also progressed in many areas through the master-apprentice relationship during my childhood, whether it was in certain aspects of Sufism or while learning the Ney. And they act just like a tailor, the masters. Just as a tailor doesn't look at you and say, wear medium, wear small, wear large, but first takes your measurements and then makes you an outfit according to your size. If they sew it for you, the old master apprentice system was just like this. The master would almost measure your capacity, your ability to understand, your aptitude in some way, and would give you knowledge accordingly. But as you can appreciate, how many outfits can a tailor really sew? In a month, how much can they really produce? So, what did the capitalist system do again? It created something called ready to wear clothing. In other words, now they could produce maybe 1,000 t shirts in an hour on machines, they could sew 1,000 shirts. So, what did they do this way? They reached more people, but those fine details started to disappear. In the same way, the education system also moved away from the master apprentice relationship, and just like in the tailor and ready to wear example, became something that appealed to the masses. But the special details started to disappear. Now it was up to the individual to find those special details themselves. They had to be able to notice them themselves. That's why the popularity of coaching was an advantage, as this ready to wear style systematic system spread all over the world. But as a disadvantage, those fine depths, those fine details were lost. That's why, of course, we come from a philosophy of tolerance. In the past, there would always be a few paintings in Sufi lodges. For example, one of these is the This Too Shall Pass painting, the Yahoo painting. It also has a very beautiful story. You know it. So one day, when the Sultan was overwhelmed both by affairs of state and his personal troubles, he summoned his viziers. He says, make me such a ring that when I look at it, if I have fallen into worldly troubles, I can save myself from that turmoil. If I have become carried away by the pleasures of the world, I can balance myself again. The viziers think and think, but they just can't figure it out. In the end, they go to a Sufi. The Sufi says, come back in a week and I will give you the ring. A week later, he gives them a ring. The Sultan puts on the ring, and indeed, whenever he finds himself out of balance in life, the ring helps him. And on the ring, it says this too shall pass. Yes, everything we think won't pass does pass. The things we thought would never end do come to an end. We say it won't end, but then we look and see that it's already in the past. Sometimes we say, I'm done for, but then we see that we keep on living anyway. That's one of those lessons. This too shall pass, you know. Another one is be tolerant. In other words, wherever you are, there is always something pleasant there. You should be able to see that pleasantness, see the good in that place. So, even though I have told you about the disadvantages of this system, we will focus on its advantages. Perhaps in this era where our opportunities to meet face to face are very limited, still being able to meet via Zoom through online education is a big step for us, and we will continue with this. So, my dear companions on this journey, may today flow smoothly for all of us. In our first section, I will introduce the coaching system and explain a bit about its definition, its approach, and how it compares to our Anatolian wisdom. Then, when we move on to our second section, I will take your questions. You will also be able to ask me your personal questions. Now, I will proceed using my slides. And this way, you will also be able to see it easily. Now, let's do it like this. Yes. Excuse me, teacher, may we drink tea? Of course you may. I wanted to have some. Yes? Now, I would like to start with this question. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word coaching? There is no right or wrong here. I'm just curious about the image that forms in your mind. For example, for some of you, you can even write it in the chat. So some of you might say, when I hear coaching, what comes to my mind is, let's see what you've written. sitting face to face, helping, listening to someone's problems, or maybe explaining something to someone. What comes to mind for you? For example, someone said travel companion. Figen? Elif said companionship on the journey. Yes, we're going with the idea of companionship on the journey. What else comes to your mind? To guide, to be a source of healing, maybe to be a light in their life, to be an impartial mirror. Yes, as you can see, I mentioned just a single concept. Helping someone see from a different perspective, finding the potential within the person in front of you, being successful in the process. Someone said navigation, Amit, to guide Zarif I too, a different perspective. See, did you notice? It means something different to everyone. The reason I asked this question, the image or feeling that comes to your mind when you think of coaching will actually be your greatest strength when you are coaching. So if you say guiding the way, it means you have an inclination within you towards guiding others. If you say being a light, then there is a path, an inclination within you towards being a light. If you say being a companion on the road, it means you can truly be a very good companion to someone. That's why I want you to think about what comes to your mind. Think about this a little after this lesson as well, because we are all like different flowers. Even if we take the same lesson, even if we cover the same topics, each of us has different inclinations. 100 people may say the same words I do, but when I say them, it's different. It creates a different kind of awakening. It leaves a different effect on the soul. When someone else says it, it leaves a different effect. So where does the word coach come from? Let's take a look at this as well, just to have some general knowledge. Actually, it originated in the 1500s. Of course, it wasn't used in this sense back then, but as a word root, it comes from the town of Koks in Hungary. Coach carriages were used to transport people from one place to another. That's why coaching later on took this word as its basis and developed from there. Now, I always say this. If you are going to move forward seriously on this path, one of the things you absolutely must learn is what you are explaining. You should research the etymological roots of words, at least up to a certain point. Because the etymological origin of a word, in other words, if you know where this word comes from, both, you can internalize that word. And you can also gain much different meanings about that word. For example, let's say there is the word life, right? There is the word animal. So, for example, what do we find when we look a bit into their origins? This comes from He. It is one of the names of God. You know how we say, it came from He and is going to the well. He means alive, to give life. It means to give life. The word hayat, life, comes from there. The word hayvan, animal, also means living in the sense of being alive. For example, it shows that it is alive. Now, when you know the roots of these words, after a while you can both internalize them and, when explaining or informing others, you can convey this in an internalized way. For this reason, I attach great importance to knowing the etymological origins of fundamental points and words. I will touch on another version of this topic in a moment as well. So first, coaching is used in the academic field. As you know, teachers who lead students to success are called academic coaches. Then it spreads to the field of personal development. It becomes life coach. As we know, it means life coach. Now actually, coaching, which spread from America and the Western system, is based on the Socratic system. Even though this isn't explained in most courses, it's something derived from Socrates' Socratic method, developed in some way and taught. So if that's the case, what were we doing? We were looking at the etymological root, that is the origin of something. Since it has progressed by being inspired in some way by Socrates, then let's take a look at its roots. Socrates Abdelhamid. For example, what kind of orientation did he have? Today, we don't say psychologist, we don't say psychological counselor, we don't say therapy, but we say coach. Why is it called coach? Why coach? It's different from the others because the coach has a different approach. Their field is not treatment, not therapy, and not aimed at psychological healing. They are after something else. Now, if we go back a little to Socrates, and we will return to Socrates. But I always want you to know this as well. Where did Socrates come up with this out of nowhere? Where did he get his inspiration from? We will look into that as well. He didn't teach, he reminded. That is basically his approach. He helped people find their own truth. And it's not about giving the answer, but about bringing the answer out from within. Now pay attention to this, because soon we will understand why he used such a phrase, Socrates. It's not about giving the answer. The goal is to bring the answer out from within. He doesn't give direction, he helps you find direction. Let's continue. Now I'm going to compare this a bit with Sufism to you. While Socrates represents the roots of modern life coaching, Sufism represents the deep roots of spiritual guidance. For example, like the relationship between Rumi and Shams, the method Shams used to teach Rumi. If you pay attention, he didn't sit down and say, "Come, I'll teach you this lesson." Instead, he had him perform a series of practices, ensuring that Rumi learned for himself through those practices. Because Rumi had already spent his whole life receiving traditional education, always sitting at the feet of teachers, learning from books. In fact, you probably know this. In that famous story, when Rumi invited Shams to his home and boasted about his library, Shams didn't even look at the books. Then he notices that Rumi values these books very much. He says, "Can you bring me your 3 most treasured books?" he says. Rumi, with great eagerness and excitement, runs and brings them. Without even glancing at the covers, Shams takes the books and throws them into the pool, into the fountain in front of him. Of course, at that moment, Rumi doesn't know what to do. He is in shock. Some of these books are handwritten manuscripts, 100 or 150 years old, and he has thrown them into the water. And of course, Shams is not someone who would just throw a book into the water. But what Shams did there was something special just for Rumi. Rumi had shut himself off so much with those books, had become so disconnected from the outside world. Book after book, he missed something. Shams needs to shake him up there. At that point, he can't change his mind just by giving advice. This is what is again, in fact, in part of the coaching system, this is called pattern breaking. For example, here is the biggest example of pattern breaking. That is, a person is caught in a behavioral pattern, a cycle, and somehow he can't get out of there at all. He's stuck there. Any advice you give at that point is useless. There, you need to do something that will break his pattern. Of course, this is a bit about manners practice. It's something that requires perception and intelligence. Anyway, when he throws those books into the water, he's suddenly shocked. "Mevlana, how could you do such a thing? What's going on?" he says. Then Shams turns to Mevlana and says, "What you're looking for is not in books." "Yes," he says, "maybe you'll know by reading, but you'll understand by loving." And then he says that famous line. He says, "Break the tip of your pen. From now on, our journey, it is a journey of love. Love cannot be written by a pen, so how could you find it in books?" That day, there is a kind of tremor, a paradigm shift in Mevlana, and from that day on, his journey begins. As you can see, what did Shams do? With a very different approach and perspective, he practically changed his paradigm. Let's continue. Socrates did not teach, but rather reminded. Sufism also never presents the truth directly. It encourages a person to discover the truth that lies within themselves. It says the truth you are seeking is you. Because if I always give you the answer to every question you ask, you cannot become your own teacher. Then you cannot know yourself. What was it that Yunus Emre taught us in his most fundamental poem? Knowledge is knowing knowledge. Knowledge is knowing yourself. What does it mean to know yourself? It means having the ability to find answers from within yourself. If a teacher were someone who could give all the answers to their student, and they can, but they don't. They make sure the student finds the answers within themselves so that they can become their own teacher and know themselves. Look at the beauty of this perspective. Let's continue with coaching. It's not about giving answers, but about drawing the answer out from within. Similarly, in Sufism, the Murshid facilitates the emergence of the answer that already exists in the heart of the murid. Truth does not come from outside, it is born from within the heart. Now, even though nowadays, even if the words Murshid and Murid are not used, or even though the word is often misunderstood negatively by most of us, the origin of the word Murshid actually comes from Irshad Eden, the one who guides. To guide, Irshad means to bring someone to maturity. Now, we all know what mature means. For example, when someone turns 18, we say they have become mature. What happens then? Well, they can make their own decisions, get a driver's license, decide to get married, and so on. They gain certain rights for a period of time. Why is that? Because it is believed that they have become mature, that their mind has reached maturity. Now, in a spiritual sense, guiding someone to spiritual maturity is called irshad, and the one who does this guiding is called a murshid. So when we look at it, even the roots of the words lead us there. So actually, the murshid's duty is always to ensure that the person becomes mature, to enable them to make their own decisions, and to help them chart their own path. That's why, even though you may hear negative news about murshids and disciples here and there in various reports today, this was its meaning in the past. The murshid would enable the person to chart their own path. It was not someone who made you admire themselves, nor someone who turned you into a servant or a slave, but on the contrary, someone who set you free. If we just read a few of the stories, we would understand this. For example, when we look at the story of Aziz Mahmud Hudai, we see that he progressed while being a student of Uftade Hazratleri. He progressed in knowledge and in the spiritual field. What does he say next? Hazrat Uftade? He says it's time for you to leave now, because now she can chart her own course. But teacher, I can't leave you. No, you must go, and now you should also train others, he says. That's why this point should not be overlooked. This point is very important. So even though coaching is very popular, of course, even though it's very popular, I believe nothing can compare to the richness of our Anatolian wisdom. That's why I also enjoy sharing these points with you here. I take pride in it. A true coach does not give direction, but helps you find your own direction. In fact, among the Sufis especially, there is a saying by Mevlana, as you know. He says, I can show you the way, but I cannot walk it for you. Let's continue. So, coaching is not about being someone who says, do it this way. It is about supporting the path that a person walks with their own decisions. We provide a map, we do not draw the road. Yes, we make sure they take the map and read it themselves. What does map mean here? Now, everything in life resembles each other. Let's not forget this. Now, being inspired, learning from others, is something we should do. Because what others have experienced, what others have learned, becomes a map for us. That map does not guarantee that we will walk that path safely. It does not guarantee that we will reach the results we want. But at the very least, it shows us what kind of path we will be taking. Later on, after following that map and after we've gone down that path a few times ourselves, we can start to draw our own path. But the first part of this process is to follow a map. For example, let's say you're learning piano, you're learning violin, whatever you're learning. What do you do first? You play a piece or an exercise written by someone else. In other words, a map, because that piece was specifically created for beginners to practice. You play it, you make progress, and eventually you reach a point where you can perform it. After a certain period of time, you start creating your own pieces. That's why it's about just giving the other person a map at a certain point and supporting them as they walk that path. So when we compare it again with Sufism, coaching is not about being someone who says, do it this way. Just as in Sufism, the guide never judges the disciple. They only make them aware. Coaching is about supporting the path a person walks with their own decisions. We say that the guide supports the path that the disciple draws with their own heart. Now, what did we say? We said we should look at the origins of words. But I always say this. At the same time, if we are talking about someone, for example, if we are talking about Mevlana or about Shams of Tabriz, We need to know this. What kind of life did he lead? How did he overcome such hardships to produce this kind of philosophy? These words came from his mind, from his soul. If you don't know his life story, you can't fully understand what he says and teaches. That's why I always say this. If you are talking about someone, you absolutely must know their life story. Is it about Mevlana? He was born in the city of Balkh, which is now in Afghanistan. He was born in the city of Balkh, which is now in Afghanistan. At that time, for example, there were Mongol invasions. Because of the Mongol invasions, his father was forced to leave their homeland. In other words, he became a kind of refugee. They kept moving from place to place, from one place to another. Finally, they arrived in Konya in the Seljuk lands. Now, if you know about that process, you can understand how, as a child, at a young age, factors like feeling rootless, homeless, unable to settle anywhere, and yet dedicating himself to knowledge. When you know this, later on, when you read a saying of Mevlana or read the Masnavi, you can give deeper meaning to his words. For example, people tell me I read the Masnavi, but I don't understand it at all. They don't know what he's talking about. So I ask, well, do you know Mevlana's life story? But do you know it in detail? They say, no, I don't know. You need to know this first, so that later you can understand why he formed those sentences. For example, whenever I encounter a man who speaks negatively about women, I immediately think this. I wonder who hurt him. What kind of life story did he have that makes him speak so negatively? Because the things he says today are the result of what he experienced in the past and the meanings he attached to those experiences. And that is precisely the reason why we absolutely need to know his entire life story. I am currently not conducting any individual sessions right now, though. But back when I used to do those individual sessions, I always wanted to know people's life stories. Maybe not in every single great detail, but at least the most significant and defining milestones. And I would listen very carefully to everything they had to say. First of all, because it's very important that the messages I give are shaped accordingly. Otherwise, two people cannot reach the same emotional state. What does Mevlana say? No matter how much you know, what you know is only as much as what the other person understands, he says. In order for them to understand, we need to know their life story, what fires they've been through, what wounds they've suffered, whose hearts they've broken. If we don't know these things, we just create a persona, a character in our minds. We assume that's how they are and start talking accordingly. That's why the greatest strength of one-on-one interaction comes from this. So, what's the difference from a seminar? In seminars and trainings, and for example, what am I doing right now? I'm speaking in more general terms. But if I were explaining this to you one-on-one, I would first listen to your story, and all the examples I gave, my entire talk, would be tailored to you. And I would tailor it according to your interests. I would act just like a tailor back then. Now, when we look at Socrates, he was born in Athens in 469 BC. His father was a sculptor, his mother a midwife. Now, let's pay attention to this. His father was a sculptor. So what does his father do? He looks at a block of marble and first sees a figure inside it, and then by chiseling away, removing the excess, he brings out a person, an object, or an animal from within that marble. In other words, what the child learns at a young age is that when his father looks at a stone, he sees a work of art inside it. Let's look at his mother. His mother is a midwife. What does a midwife do for a child? She helps another person be born from within a person. It's something truly astonishing for a child to observe. Notice what he said. Socrates says, not to give the answer, but to help the answer be born from within him. The child had already witnessed this at a young age. The birth of a living being from within another living being. He never wrote a book, never founded a school, because he always focused on one-on-one interactions. He always worked directly with people. He participated in 3 wars. Why am I giving this detail about the wars? Because the true journey of wisdom for people, wisdom not knowledge. What's the difference? Knowledge is knowing something. It is book knowledge. Wisdom, on the other hand, is knowledge gained and learned through experience. You read the other kind in books. There are people around you who talk about everything, but then there are those who have truly lived it, felt it in their bones, and the words that come from that lived experience are entirely different. So tell me, does a person truly need to have experienced significant, profound pain in their life in order to finally embark on a long journey toward gaining wisdom? One might ask, is such a struggle truly necessary? But interestingly, it is often that very pain that allows a person to fully recognize and awaken their hidden inner potential. Just as a piece of common coal can eventually turn into a brilliant diamond under immense pressure, or as raw gold only reaches its purest form by passing through the intense heat of fire, a person can only truly embark on a profound journey of wisdom after going through an arduous and deeply transformative process. Of course, the challenging process here can be different for everyone. For example, what is a difficult process for you might be an easy one for someone else. And what is an easy process for you might be a very difficult one for them. At that point, every tooth aches in its own jaw. I'm not necessarily referring to a specific event when I talk about difficulty here. It's something that relates to you personally. But a person who hasn't gone through these fires, who hasn't experienced certain losses in life, cannot truly internalize that wisdom. For example, the losses experienced by someone who has been to war, like the death of a friend, can make them see life from a completely different perspective. Now, since we're on this topic, I'll recommend a book. I'll write it in the chat. It's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Yes, that is exactly right. I've written it in the chat. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Let me briefly talk about it, as it's directly related to this topic. Viktor Frankl was a prominent Austrian psychiatrist, practicing in Vienna during the 1930s. He studied medicine and then specialized in psychiatry. He had his own clinic and offered various solutions to people. In Germany at that time, Hitler's Nazi party comes to power after a while. They establish various concentration camps. As you know, the Nazi camps where many people were sent. And he too is sent to one of those Nazi camps and spends a long time there. And while spending time there, he comes face to face with real human psychology, because every day he witnesses deaths, hunger, and torture. While all this is happening, he sees the endurance of people, and all his perspectives and all the rules he had about life are shattered there. At the same time, he realizes how strong a person can be and sees how much pain a human being can endure. Then he himself goes through this painful process, but at the same time he also thinks, how do people do this? How can they endure it? He focuses on this question. And let me give a very small example from there. For instance, he realizes this. If, say, a rumor is going around, they will release us at New Year's. For example, it's only September, there's still time until New Year's, and the thought of they will release us at New Year's gives people such hope that they can endure even the harshest tortures. But when New Year's comes and they are not released, people start dying one after another the very next day. There, for example, he realizes this. He realizes the power of hope. You know, there's a saying, a person who has lost hope has nothing left to lose. So they say. He witnesses a real-life example of this, and later on, he survives this camp and develops a therapy method called logotherapy. Logotherapy means therapy of meaning, and later this therapy method becomes a system that helps tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So, as we can see here, what brings about Viktor Frankl's transformation are again the things he saw and experienced there. It's actually a thin book. I definitely recommend you read it. It gives you a different perspective. So, what do we understand from what we've covered so far? A person's experiences, their past, and what they encounter become a part of who they are. At the age of 70, Socrates is sentenced to death because he is accused of corrupting the youth and rejecting the gods. Because even though I say that nowadays we can, of course, express our opinions much more freely, we still have to be more careful about everything we say due to a prevailing cancel culture. In Socrates' philosophy, it's more important to make people think than to give them answers. Giving answers is temporary. Making people think leads to transformation. Making people think enables them to find their own truth, he says. Now, when we look and compare with Mevlana, he also says, it is more valuable to turn people towards their own hearts than to give them advice. Socrates says, giving answers is temporary. Making people think leads to transformation, he says. Mevlana also says, giving knowledge from the outside is temporary. The awakening of the heart brings transformation, he says. Let's continue. In coaching, in Socrates' method, for example, let's say I feel unsuccessful. He says, I will touch on this in a moment. I don't feel like doing anything. I've lost hope in life, and so on and so forth. It's not about responding to that, but first understanding them through questions. Now, language is very interesting. When someone says something to us, that sentence means something to us, but does it mean the same thing to them as well? Most of the time, no. That's why Socrates discovered this a long time ago. When someone says, I feel exhausted, or says, I feel like a failure, he would ask, what does failure mean to you? First, I need to define this. Maybe they've set such a definition of success for themselves. For example, I'll consume this many calories a day, I'll do this sport, at the same time I'll be a good mother, I'll also be successful at my job, I'll take singing lessons, and I'll learn piano. But if they've set the bar for themselves as, I'm only successful if I do all of these things, then they won't be able to achieve it. That's simply not possible, and they'll always believe they're failing. So we can't know. Your definition of success or failure might be different from theirs. Socrates discovered this beautifully. That's why, what should we do first with the other person's definition? We should try to understand it. Let's continue. The one who asks the question opens the way. The skill of asking questions should be taken beyond the surface and focused on making people think. Einstein also has a saying like this. I really like it and I find it very true. Look, take this to heart, make it your motto. How do we recognize a person's intelligence? Is it from their sense of humor or from the sentences they use? Yes, we can tell a little from all of these, but mostly from the questions they ask. We recognize a person's true intelligence not from the answers they give, but from the questions they ask. That's why asking questions is a very subtle point. Asking questions is a matter of intelligence. We said that the Socratic method is not about giving answers, but about eliciting the answer, if you recall, and he was inspired by his mother. So in Socrates there are 4 types of questions. Those that probe definitions, those that catch contradictions, those that seek causality, and those that open up alternatives. Now you don't have to write all of these down, because I accidentally exited from here. Since I have carefully prepared a comprehensive set of examples of these specific questions for you today, we will also be making sure to send all of these materials over to you shortly in the form of a detailed PowerPoint presentation file. But in fact, Boğaziçi campus has already uploaded that PowerPoint file called The Power of Questions to the chat. You can already download it from the chat as well. And if you can't download it, your relevant friend will make sure you receive it. So why am I saying this? Right now, as I'm explaining this, it might seem a bit complicated to you. I have written all of these questions out for you individually, so there's no need to worry too much about it right now. We understand how it is. So just focus on what I'm explaining right now. Questioning definitions, catching contradictions, causality, opening up alternatives. What does it mean to question definitions? It's the topic I mentioned a little while ago. What does success mean to you? I'm not happy. How do you define happiness? So, what is happiness for you? For example, is it laughing from morning till night? Is it always feeling good? If someone defines happiness like this, they will never be able to reach it anyway. So, what do? Make this a habit, like starting from today, for example. Make it a habit for the people around you as well. Ask them, for example, to people who say, I'm not in a good mood, I'm unhappy, I'm unsuccessful, I'm not a good mother, I'm not a good father. Ask them, what do you mean? Just ask that. Try to understand this. Questions that catch contradictions. For example, someone says, I value myself a lot. They say this, but they never put their own opinions forward anywhere. They always avoid, hide, and are afraid. They say, what if I embarrass myself? That's what they say. There's a problem here. They say they value themselves, but they're afraid to present their ideas. So there must be something different going on there. In other words, they actually don't think their own ideas are valuable enough. They're afraid their ideas will be rejected. For example, you need to spot these kinds of contradictions when the person in front of you is giving you information. For instance, they say, I'm very social. That's what they say. But then they say, but at this point I can't meet anyone new. That's what they say. They say, I'm very enthusiastic. That's how they put it. People will present you with these contradictions. Confronting people with their contradictions touches on their thoughts about being consistent, about needing to be consistent, and helps them become aware of it. Because change begins with awareness. Does awareness mean change? It does not. Action is necessary, but an action taken without awareness does not bring about change either. Very rarely does it lead to change in general, because you don't know what you're doing. I mean, let's say you've set your sails, but you don't know where you're going. So in that case, setting your sails has no meaning for you. The third category involves causality questions, which among these 4 distinct types of questions are actually one of the specific areas that I personally value and deeply care about the most. For example, when someone says they want something, let's say, I want to quit smoking, they say. Or they say, I want a relationship, they say. Or they say something like, I want to go to the gym, I want to go on a diet. Why do you want to do this? I ask. If the individual in question can't list at least 6 or perhaps even 7 distinct reasons in the span of a single minute, they will never be able to find the necessary internal motivation and drive to do it from within themselves. If you have strong enough reasons, and if your reasons are truly powerful, you will inevitably discover a viable path to do it, and you will take the action needed to make it happen somehow. But if you only have one reason, if your reason isn't strong enough, you can't generate the energy to act. Look, I'll repeat it. So, why do you want to do it? If the person can't immediately give 5 to 10 answers to this question, know that they won't change it. For example, someone says, I want to learn piano too. They say, I play for our guests, I play at camp or at seminars, or I play the ney flute. They say, I want to learn piano too. They say, why do you want to learn? I ask. They say, it's very nice. They say, anything else? I ask. That's it. 1. 2, playing an instrument. But that's basically the same as the first one. I mean, because playing the piano, playing the ney, or doing anything isn't just like, let me go sit down and play. It's not. Everything in life has its own difficulty. There are no shortcuts on roads worth traveling, and what will keep you from giving up in the face of those difficulties are your reasons, your strong reasons. That is exactly why you need to do this for your own sake. And when you are speaking with someone else, you should help them discover their own personal reasons as well. Otherwise, they won't take action. Let's continue. Questions that open up alternatives. Questions that open up alternatives are also about bringing a different perspective, which is actually what much of Sufism does. That's why I always say that a person needs to adopt a philosophy. For example, what does Mevlana say? Someone comes and says, all the troubles are coming down on me. He says to Mevlana, I don't know what to do, O Hudavendigar. At that time, people addressed him as Hudavendigar. He tells him, "Sometimes troubles pour down on you like rain, but don't forget that the colorful rainbow also appears after the rain." Look, he gives such a different perspective to someone who is a farmer, someone who works with the land. Or let's recall another saying attributed to Shams. What does he say? He says, "Do not resist the changes that life brings your way, surrender to them. Don't worry that your order will be disrupted, that your life will be turned upside down. How can you know that the bottom of your life won't be better than the top?" he says. Now, for a farmer, for someone who works with the land, this is so meaningful. It's meaningful for all of us, but for them, it's especially meaningful. Because what does he do from time to time? He aerates the soil. When the soil no longer yields as much as he wants, he turns the soil upside down so that it becomes fertile again. Look, what is he doing? He changes his perspective, because everything is also a matter of perspective. When you change your perspective, your feelings toward it also change at the same time. Let's continue. Definition, questioning, questions. So, as we just discussed, when we look at it from the perspective of Sufism, what is love for you? How do you define it in your heart? Sufis approach it in the same way. For questions that involve contradictions, they say, for example, "I believe that everything comes from God." You say this, but then why do you ask, "How am I going to deal with this?" Why do you ask that? Questions that catch contradictions, questions of causality. What is the real reason you want to embark on this path? For example, among Sufis, there used to be a ritual of waiting at the threshold of the door. Nowadays, people give up if they have to wait half an hour, but back then, when you went to a dervish lodge, they wouldn't let you in right away. You wait at the threshold of the door for 3 days. They bring you just a little soup, a bit of bread, and some water during the day to see if you truly want this. Most people there say, "Forget this, I'm done with this kind of thing." Like, "We've been standing here for a whole day and no one has opened the door." That means there isn't enough reason for it. So if someone gives up after 3 hours, 5 hours, or a day, they wouldn't be able to complete the training here anyway. They would just waste the teacher's time and their own time as well. It's actually a very effective elimination system. We already mentioned alternative open-ended questions a moment ago. The Sufi system is entirely built upon this. It enables you to gain different perspectives and look at things from various angles. I'll give an example of a practice, deepening in silence, which is also used by Sufis. Now, it is absolutely vital that you keep this important point in mind. Whenever we find ourselves engaged in a private, one-on-one conversation or a focused session with another person, we almost always feel an intense internal pressure to constantly say something ourselves to fill the silence. But certain profound answers are truly born out of the depths of silence. That person needs to become silent and carefully listen to the whispers of their own heart, in the energy that emerges there. That's why I've used this method a lot in the past. Even now, whenever we have our training camps, I still use it quite often. The other person sits directly across from you right here. And then you ask them a specific question, no matter which exercise you're doing, but they won't answer out loud. Now, here, I mentioned something called pattern breaking a little earlier. Pattern breaking means making a move they don't expect. Now here, their mind will immediately want to answer, but since speaking is forbidden, after a while their mind will get confused and will communicate in another way. That's why it's just a 5-minute exercise. You set your watch or your phone, set it for 5 minutes. You tell them, for these 5 minutes, you're not going to speak at all. I will ask questions. You will think about the question. Between your questions, you can give either 30 seconds or 45 seconds. You will sense it in the moment. And a 5-minute silence exercise. You will realize that it is a method stronger than most explanations or messages you want to convey. Because silence is something that is often dismissed and whose depth is forgotten. Sufis also do a similar practice. In fact, among Sufis, there are hamush conversations. What does hamush mean in Persian? It means silent. For example, the teacher comes, a spiritual guide. He just looks for an hour, doesn't speak at all. And those who are able to receive it that day say that the deepest conversation happened on that day. I just told you about a 5-minute method a little while ago. You definitely need to try this. 30 questions used in coaching. So, as I mentioned earlier, the PowerPoint file you can download contains these. I just want to show you this. I wrote all the questions for you and also provided examples. For example, he presented us with a concept. Did you define this concept yourself, or was it taught to you? What does success mean to you? How do you measure it? Is what you call happiness temporary or permanent, as you can see? Then there are questions that catch contradictions. We take a look, for example. I trust myself. You say, but then why are you constantly seeking others' approval? You say you're brave, but when was the last time you confronted your fear? Because what does courage mean? Courage means doing something you're afraid of. If you're not afraid while doing it, we don't call that courage anyway. Like, I want to change. You say, but why do you choose to stay in the same cycle? And then questions about causality. Like, why do you want this? Is this really your own desire? We look into it. What will achieving this goal bring you? How does this thought protect you? Questions that open up alternative perspectives. What was the biggest thing that influenced you when making this decision? What would someone looking at this situation from the outside see? For example, this one is also really nice. If you say something like this to people, for example, I use this a lot with the same problem. Let's say they say, for example, I always meet the same type of people. They say, I say, if someone came to you and said, I always meet the same type of people, what would you say to them? Most of the time they give such answers that while giving that answer, they say, why didn't I think of this? They say, look, again, the answer comes from within themselves. Keep this in mind. It's a very effective method. Because most of the time we know the answers, but when it comes to ourselves, we can't reach that answer. That's why while we can easily help someone else, we may have a hard time helping ourselves. If my childhood self experienced this situation, what would they feel? So how do you remember this? Then I also added questions about self and identity to these. For example, is it possible for me to develop a different perspective on this? Which one is your true voice? And so on. As you can see, these are questions about values and beliefs. As you can see, I have prepared 30 question templates that you can work on or ask others. Now, if we summarize what we've covered so far, because we'll be taking a break soon. We'll take a tea, water, rest, or rather a brewing break. Because in Sufi philosophy, this is something very valuable. After receiving some knowledge, allow it to steep. Just like brewing tea. We don't just pour the tea in right away. We say the tea hasn't brewed yet, wait a little longer. In the same way, knowledge also needs to steep like this. No matter what kind of knowledge it is, we need to allow it to steep. In the system we've looked at so far, we've seen coaching, Socratic questioning, the etymological roots of a word, the lives of the people we've learned from, and the differences in their perspectives up to now, as well as how those perspectives are reflected on us. Now we will take a break. After our break, I will take questions and answers from you. In the Q&A session, we will revisit these topics and start to explore them further. So just take a moment with yourself. Yes, let me check if anything has come in through the chat section. Yes, again, you can also see the PowerPoint in the chat section. How nice, we've already started helping each other right away. Let's always be like this. It's exactly 10 o'clock right now. We will start at 10 past 10. Let's take a break and then start our second part. Now, in our second part, those friends who don't want to ask questions by voice or video can also write their questions in the chat section. I will answer 2 or 3 questions by voice. After that, I will also read the questions from the chat from time to time. You can raise your hand using the application right in front of you. When you do that, it puts you in order. I will also respond to you from there. We can start with your questions. Yes, who would like to ask first? Rukia. Yes, let's start with Rukia.
Yes, hello there, Professor Miller. Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, I'm very pleased to meet you. I mean, I can't get out of your videos. You really have a fluent, captivating speaking style.
Thank you very much.
I'm very pleased as well. As I said, I can't tear myself away from your videos. So, Professor, my question for you is this. Maybe, I don't know what you'll think, but I want to become a life coach now. Yes. In your opinion, how does one become a good life coach? What kind of person should one be? I mean, how should one behave and how should one address the other person? Of course, I've listened to how this should be done in all your videos, but I want to learn it directly from you. So, should we become a good life coach or a life coach at all? I mean, every family will need a life coach. You said this in one of your videos, I watched it. Should we really become one? And how does one become a good life coach? I want to learn this from you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for your kind words. First of all, I believe that any kind of help that falls within the fields of psychology and philosophy is an art. In other words, if a person doesn't have the desire to help others within themselves, no matter how much education they receive, even if it's 10 years or how many thousands of books they read, it just won't happen. So how can you tell if you have this within you? So do I have the potential to be a coach or not? How can you tell? Actually, if you look at yourself from the outside a little, you can see this. For example, if people can come to you and comfortably share their problems, and after telling you about their troubles, they say, I feel so relieved, it felt really good to talk to you, then there need to be signs of this. But let me give you an example. Years ago, a young person came to our training. He said, I want to be a psychologist. I want to study psychology and do therapy. So we had spent a day with him, and I said, look, your personality structure is not really suitable for this. You probably won't do this. That's why I'm suggesting something else to you. I'm recommending something else for you. No, he insisted. I will definitely be that. I will be this. Because he neither liked listening to people, nor did people naturally come to him and want to talk to him. He didn't want to talk to other people, nor did he want to share what he had learned. And yet he wanted to go and work as a one-on-one psychologist. But there was nothing like that in the kid. The kid went and studied psychology for 4 years. He even did a master's degree on top of that. Now, at another company, he's working in the marketing department because he just doesn't have it in him. If this exists, it means we have a foundation suitable for building a skyscraper. What needs to be in place? First of all, there needs to be an incurable curiosity inside a person. A hunger for learning and a hunger that never ends. In other words, the desire to learn something new, to read a new book. But also, after reading, the urge to share it. If these things are present, this person will already find themselves in this field one way or another. The only trap you must avoid is the trap of perfectionism. If you say, let me perfect all these things first and then set out, you'll keep postponing, and you'll never actually get started. Even if there are mistakes, even if it's a bit rough around the edges, just express yourself and share it somehow. Write a post on Instagram, start a live broadcast, try to explain yourself. Because we always say the only way to rehearse for things like this, the only way to rehearse for the stage is actually on stage. For example, you can't rehearse at home by imagining you're speaking to 100 people. You have to face those people. So basically, these are the things I've mentioned.
I understand. Thank you very much, Professor. See you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Yes, who else? Who would like to ask a question next?
Excuse me, how do we raise our hand?
Please go ahead. Ms. Elvin.
Hello, good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad to meet you too. There's something that's been on my mind. I started this life coaching journey not so much to help others, but rather with the idea of first becoming my own life coach. That's why I set out on this path. In this regard, I've been thinking about how I can contribute to myself in my own way. I've been struggling with this, but I'm having a hard time finding answers for myself. Helping someone else is one thing. Helping yourself, understanding yourself, that's something entirely different. So do you have any advice on this? What kind of path should I follow?
You've asked a very good question. In fact, this is generally the approach we should have. We need to first consider every piece of knowledge we learn for ourselves. Because if we reflect on ourselves and solve things within ourselves, then we can already help others. If you notice, what did I talk about in the first part? I'm experiencing a problem with myself, I'm searching for the solution to that problem, and I find it. Then I share what I've learned with others. Look, I'm not someone who has solved all their problems, but there is a problem I have solved. And I also know how I solved that problem. And then I share the problem I solved. That's how I've always progressed, step by step. That's why, for example, we had a lesson today, didn't we? What did we say if we want to change something? First, we said definition. You will apply the same thing to yourself. Let's say there's something you want to solve within yourself. For example, let's say you find that you start something but can't keep it going. You see your sustainability as weak. For instance, you'll start with the section of definition questioning questions. What does sustainability mean to you? How much do you need to do to see yourself as consistent and sustainable? Is it if you do it for 6 months or if you do it for 1 year? Look, right now we're not working on someone else. You're working on yourself. So what do you do next? You move on to causality questions. For example, you ask, why do I need to change this habit of mine? You realize you have just one answer. Then you expand that answer to 10 different ones. So actually within this system, you will come up with a few issues about yourself using all the knowledge you've learned, ones you want to solve. We all have problems. You will apply this to those problems. Then you'll see that you're solving them. And as you solve them, you'll also become able to share these with others in the same way.
Is it about writing as a director? Is it a monologue or is it an inner dialogue? So you need to realize this by writing.
For example, I don't do it by writing, I do it by creating a monologue. But if writing helps you internalize it more, then do it by writing.
I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. Not at all. Dilruba. Yes.
Good evening, teacher. Good
Evening.
teacher. What I'm curious about is this. For example, I like listening to people. To them, well, I mean, honestly, rather than just giving advice or anything, when someone consults with you and they find your ideas reasonable and they find your idea logical and they actually put it into practice and it really works out. I observe this a lot around me. I can make very accurate decisions for that person, or I can also give reasonable guidance. But I have this problem myself. When I listen to someone else, I have a hard time stepping out of their issue and returning to my own life. Their problems start spinning around in my head. I find myself having left my own life behind and chasing after someone else's troubles constantly. But I have a life too. I mean, I have my own problems as well. Who's going to solve them? So I end up draining my own energy this time. When I focus on others like this, for example, how can we manage that? How can we return to our own lives?
Now, we all have very different characters and unique personalities. Some people are much more easily affected by the subtle energies of others around them.
Yes, that's true.
And while their positive sides have a positive effect, their negative sides also have a negative effect. Now, this isn't something that can change much. First of all, I want to start by saying this. That's why I tend to direct these people more towards certain things. Rather than one-on-one, I tend to guide them more towards speaking to groups or expressing themselves through writing. Because this isn't something that will change much. But something that is seen as a negative in you can actually turn you into a public speaker. At the same time, because you probably won't feel this when you're addressing a crowd. In other words, you won't feel it when you're speaking to a group either. But when you do it one-on-one, because your energy is so intense while listening to one person, so much so that You get drawn into the energy they're expressing and you get affected by that energy.
All my attention is on them, teacher. I'm completely focused on them, I mean.
Yes, because your imagination is very strong at that point. Your ability to focus is also very strong. This decreases a bit over time. We call this hedonic adaptation. After a while, you start to be less affected, but you still get affected to a certain degree. In these kinds of situations, I say, for example, I've worked with many people who experience the same problem you mentioned, but who are also psychologists. I tell them this: work with fewer people. Because that's your character. We can't do anything about that anymore. Or maybe the creator wants you to develop in another direction, maybe to become a writer, for example. There are some people like that. When I was little, I used to attend writers' conferences all the time, very famous writers. At that time, I was in Bursa. They would come to the small hall. I would see that some of them couldn't speak at all. They can't answer, they get stuck, they can't look people in the eye, but when they're writing, they soar. When they're writing, they can reach everywhere like an incredible volcano. So I started to realize back then that the Creator has strengthened each of us in different ways. From today on, you should question that a little yourself. Maybe mine is more about speaking to crowds. It guides me in an instinctive way. Maybe it's to improve my writing. Maybe if I do this a little, it will develop over time. That's why you should follow this a bit.
For example, teacher, speaking for myself, I've reduced the amount of time I spend listening to people. I've cut down my time and duration. I don't want to listen to people's problems. For example, not anymore. When someone starts talking about their problems, I start to worry that the same thing might happen to me. Or, when that person is sad and crying in front of me, it's like I'm falling apart while they're crying. So I don't listen anymore. I say, please, I really don't feel well. I understand. I mean, you're really upset, but I honestly can't listen right now.
All right then, reflect a bit and think about what I just told you.
Okay, teacher, thank you.
It was nice. Rukin's was also very good. Look.
Thank you, you too.
Yes, now Fatma. Let's listen and take her question. Good.
Good evening, teacher. Good.
Good evening.
First of all, it's really nice to have lessons with you. It's also very nice to have met all my friends. When I'm doing life coaching, should a person give examples from their own life in order to guide the other person? For example, in the past, I did it this way. So, of course, with open-ended questions, should we also give examples from our own lives to the other person? Should we be able to do that? Could this be something for the other person? Can it be explained in the form of an open-ended question?
I asked a good question. Now, if you're addressing a group, a general audience, I'm generally in favor of giving examples from your own life, because it is always more convincing and therefore more valuable for a person to give their own example rather than giving the examples of others. I would even have them conduct a study like this, but I would have people who speak in front of an audience do this more often. Because at one point I also taught public speaking classes. I would say, find your own stories from the past and work on telling them better. How can I tell it better? With an introduction, development, and how can I tell it in an exciting way? That's what I would say. Because to people, your own stories always seem more convincing. In one-on-one situations, if the other person has formed a genuine connection with you, sharing your story feels good. But if they've established a very formal connection, in other words, it's clear that I'm only interested in the information you'll provide me here, not in your personality. If you say that, trying to be sincere might actually make them pull back a bit. In that case, you can proceed on a more technical level. But if you sense sincerity, I support giving examples from your own life. That's what I advocate. Because then that person feels, oh look, they opened up to me, and they also open up themselves. Milton Erickson was an important psychiatrist. For example, he had a methodology. He would say, if I want someone to talk to me about their childhood, their school years, if I want them to talk about their elementary school years, I usually do the following. He says, I briefly share my own elementary school years, like the moments when I went out for recess. When I talk about this, their own school years automatically start coming to their mind. Even before I ask that question, they start thinking about it. Because sometimes when you suddenly ask someone to tell you about their school years, they can freeze up. Suddenly they wonder, how should I answer? What should I talk about? But when Milton Erickson shares one of his own memories there, the other person is already thinking about their own memory. For example, things like this happen among friends. For instance, someone might say, like, one day at the sea, we were paddling a canoe and we fell overboard, or something like that. Then someone else remembers a memory about the sea. After that, everyone starts sharing their sea stories. That's why sometimes sharing your own memory can encourage others to share theirs as well. When you ask, they might not remember, can't tell, are afraid, or feel shy. But when you share your story, it can encourage them to share theirs. So you can look at it from this perspective as well.
All right, thank you, teacher. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's also take a look at the chat section. Teacher, when a client comes in who has experienced the same pains we have in the past, how should we behave regarding what we've experienced in the past? We should behave normally. After all, we as humans probably, as humanity, we experience similar pains. Okay, maybe you might mean something like this. Let's say, for example, I lost my father and he also lost his father. But look at this as a loss in general. So, and you can approach them more sincerely and closely. At that point, you can approach more empathetically. Because you have gone through that process, you can offer them a completely different perspective. So there is absolutely no problem in mentioning this either. We will continue with this. Now, let's take Özlem's question.
Hello, teacher.
Hello?
Hello to everyone as well. Here's my question. As you explained at the beginning, this is something we have already experienced in our own lives, even without coaching, through our friends and our environment. And there are a few points I've been thinking about regarding this topic. I want to share them with you and actually clarify them. When people share something with you, of course, along with sharing, they also trust your insight and your experiences. And a question like this can come up. Of course, this isn't always the case, but I think it's very critical. A question. What would you do if you were in my place? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Now, when faced with this question, should you give a general answer in a sincere way without going into detail? Should we really share our honest personal opinion? Or is it possible to completely shift the focus to the other person, emphasizing its subjectivity and removing ourselves from the equation?
That's a very good question. I never answer this question. What would you do if you were in my place? I mean, most of the time, this is a question used to brush things off. And really, what would I do if I were in your shoes? That question won't help. That's just how it is, because I'm a different person. My past is different, my experiences are different, my circumstances are different, and yours are different too. So basing your actions on the answer I would give would already be wrong for you. That's why I'm in favor of not answering this question. But if you're sincere, for example, let's say you're really close with that person and they ask me, hey Hakan, what would you do? Even if I give them an answer out of sincerity, I still explain it to them. If it were me, I would do it this way because this is how I view life. This is how I see family, so I would act accordingly, and I give an answer by grounding it in that perspective. But you are a different person. For example, let's say I said when I cut off communication, I cut it off completely. I never communicate again. But this is my personality, and it's not something difficult for me. I'm already this kind of person by nature. But you, my point is, you are not that kind of person. If you try to do what I do, it won't work. For example, I can swim well in water like a fish, but you are a cheetah. You can run well on land. That's why I'm bringing a perspective that says you can't do what I do and I can't do what you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ur said no pain, no gain. What do you think about this saying? First, what did we say? Let's clarify what we mean by pain in questions that challenge definitions. Now, pain, for some people, pain means suffering, as in I'm in pain, I'm suffering, I'm in agony. but for others it means a challenge that needs to be overcome. When we look at it as a challenge to be overcome and interpret the saying this way, it's correct. Progress always comes as a result of struggle. To give the simplest example, I'm talking about learning music again. Even when you're learning to play the piano, you're going to experience a certain level of pain. Your fingers will hurt, you'll practice from morning till night, your back will get stiff. If you don't give up and keep going despite all this, you'll learn it. This is the kind of pain being talked about here. It's not about saying you absolutely have to suffer. Listen to Ferdi Taifa. It's not a kind of pain where you hurt yourself on purpose. Of course, those kinds of pain can also help a person grow, but you shouldn't let it lead you into melancholy or self-inflicted suffering. That's it. For growth to happen, there needs to be some struggle, some challenge. Yes, I agree with this point. Yes, Dilek, let's take Dilek's question.
Hello, Professor. This is Bilek from Mula. How are you?
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you as well. Professor, I also wrote a bit in the chat, but I wanted to mention it here as well. I also have a question for you. Now, I used to work at an insurance company. What I noticed was this. We used to have one-on-one meetings, not so much group meetings, but mostly one-on-one. The main thing I got from the people I met with was this. People were constantly telling me about their problems. First of all, they wanted to talk to me because I was a good listener. And at the same time, what I noticed was this. When we both had positive energy during the conversation, these talks became more engaging with the other person. How should I put it? For example, it became more solution-oriented for you. I mean, you would understand this better. And another thing I noticed, sir, was this. People really want to talk. They want someone to listen to them. This was the thing I noticed the most. So that's what I would share with you from that experience. My question to you is this. I can communicate better with people from whom I get positive energy. For example, if someone is smiling, if we're on the same wavelength, for instance, I also like to be positive, they would say. And if there is something, I really listen and do my best to help, regardless of the specific individual involved. I am honestly not entirely certain if this is a truly significant factor in the field of professional life coaching. How would you evaluate this?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I agree with what you shared. Likewise, yes. Of course, now we are human beings. Both positive energy and negative energy affect us. What does Mevlana say? Pay attention to whom you spend time with, to whom you befriend, because the nightingale leads you to the rose, while the crow leads you to the garbage heap. So it means that all of us are affected by negative and positive people in some way, depending on the situation. When I face people who stand in front of me with a frown, a person can only maintain their energy up to a certain point. You tend to share more with people who are more positive, who have a smiling face. Sometimes, on stage, someone sits there and looks at you in such a way, almost as if they're cursing at you. But you say this, my skills and abilities aren't just for those who smile. If I can keep explaining even when the person in front of me is sullen, that is exactly where my true strength comes from. That is the mentality we need to adopt. You know how they say a master captain proves himself in stormy seas? A coach, a master speaker, is someone who can keep going even if they don't get that energy. I mean, I have so many stories like that here. For example, you go somewhere, you're invited to give a talk, and there are people talking among themselves, or there's noise in the room. Because sometimes there are places like this, you're not just invited to a seminar. For example, you're invited to a special evening, there are table arrangements and so on. They've asked something special from you. You go up there and all you hear are the sounds of forks and knives while you're trying to talk about Sufism. But right at that moment, I tell myself this. I say, Hakan, even here, if you can maintain your own balance and no matter how much noise there is outside, if you can convey what you want to say with the right energy, then this is your test right now, not theirs. And I change my perspective accordingly. That's why everyone can speak beautifully to someone who is smiling. But when you can't get any energy, you say this. This person has come before me right now to teach me a lesson, no matter what perspective they look at me from. You can say, I choose to explain things in a beautiful way and turn it into an advantage and a lesson. Very
Thank you very much, teacher. You're
welcome. But I will pray that you always encounter people who smile.
Thank you very much.
You are more than welcome. Happy to help. Teacher, there are many people around us who want to dim our light and undermine our self-confidence. How should we carry ourselves in such situations? How can we move forward without being affected by the situation? In fact, in my general and basic explanations, I always mention this. You need to build your own environment. Yes, sometimes we may not be able to change our environment in life. Some people may have to remain constant in our lives. But instead of focusing on them, we can choose our own environment. For example, this is what I strive for. For instance, in this training, you are meeting each other and you can continue these connections. When people come together face to face in my trainings, which will also happen here, as you know. For example, when you come there, think about it. Among all these people, those who dedicate themselves to education are the ones who attend. We need to become friends with those people, stay connected, hold weekly Zoom meetings, and somehow strengthen our communication. In other words, we need to build environments that empower us, consciously. I still do this myself. Did I meet someone? Did they give off a good energy? I try to make them a part of my life immediately. Because God brings us together with people, but being able to continue with them depends on our own effort. Never forget this. That's why you build your own environment and you need to make an effort for it. All right. Yes, Zuhal. Let's listen to Zuhal.
Hello, good evening. First of all, thank you for the information you shared. You're welcome. I live on Bankish Island. I started this journey from my English teaching background. It's about 7 to 8 years ago. How nice. Actually, I've been working as a consultant for a long time. Actually, I wanted to hear about this training and coaching from you again. But I have a bit of a handicap. I want to share this with you. What should the effective duration be? I mean, most of the time I can't stick to an hour and I go over. In other words, I can't keep it to just 1 hour, not just in coaching, but also with clients. I mean, it feels like I'm leaving that person halfway. Sessions always end up running long like this. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, setting a time limit. Even though setting a time limit can sometimes be perceived as formal, it's actually important both for you and for the other person's development. In fact, studies on dopamine have shown that our brains only release dopamine after achieving specific and clear goals. Because there's this piece of information. When you do something and succeed, your brain releases dopamine. But, for example, you say you'll do it for an hour. At the end of that hour, your brain releases dopamine, but if you don't set that hour, your brain doesn't know when it's over. So even your brain can't figure out how to release it. That's why, to make the other person feel like they've accomplished something, and for yourself, set a time limit. Set it. There should also be a time limit so that the person can reflect during those intervals. Like when you go to the gym one day and rest for 2 days, if your muscles develop during that rest period, here too, even if you say, I can't manage this, you should be able to develop it. You can set something up for yourself. 45. When it gets to 45 minutes, let's start wrapping up gradually. You should arrive 15 minutes earlier. If you try to wrap things up in the last 5 minutes, you'll end up taking an hour and a half again. That's why you need to set yourself to 45 minutes. And remember, you're actually doing this for their own good. Because at some point, you also need to demonstrate your expertise to the other person. Conversations without a set time will eventually be perceived as just a casual chat by the other party. And then its value decreases, the value of the conversation. But conversations that are set with limits, well, casual chats don't have limits, especially. So in this case, my subconscious receives the message that valuable information is coming. It creates that impression. That's why if we want to be helpful to the other person, we need to pay attention to this.
Thank you. You're welcome.
At all. I'm checking here from the chat section. Anything else? Life? It says when doing life coaching. Ishi, how do you understand the client's level of awareness? I mean, of course I can tell from the very first word they say, but how can we understand it? From the specific way they talk to us, how they carefully explain things, from their immediate reaction when you give them a helpful suggestion, and from how much they truly understand it. For example, let's say you give them a sentence, ask them to form it, whatever it is. Then ask, what does this sentence mean to you? Just ask that. From the answer they give, you can mostly understand their level of awareness. For example, give an example. Let me ask you as well. I usually do this not in coaching, but in Sufi studies. Mevlana says, it cannot be found just by searching, but only those who search can find it. I ask, what do you think this means? Everyone has an answer. Some look at it from a deeper place, while others can see it from a very shallow perspective. More or less, you can understand the level of awareness of the person in front of you at that point. So if you really can't understand, under normal circumstances, you can sense it from their energy. Say a sentence that is important to you, or maybe a simpler sentence, for example. You do not need to be perfect just to begin your journey, but you certainly have to begin to eventually become perfect. What does this mean to you? The specific response that they provide to this will immediately reveal to you their level of awareness in a very clear and unmistakable manner. Let's see if there's anything else. Good evening, Mr. Hakan. Mrs. Yasemin asked, will you come to Germany? Yes, I've been to Germany so many times that, in fact, I visited some German cities more often than some cities in Turkey. We will be coming to Germany. In fact, one of the face-to-face sessions will also be held in Germany. If you follow me on Instagram, you can already see it there. By the way, I've always managed my own Instagram account myself. By the way, I still manage it myself and I still reply to the messages myself. So when you reply to or ask a question about something I post, I always respond when I see it, because sometimes we get into a busy schedule. For example, I'm at camp all day. At those times I can't check it. I just wanted to mention that here. Yes, thank you, he said. I make too many concessions to the people I love, and in the end, I'm the one who gets hurt, Ignor said. And finally, my compassion and selflessness have reached their peak. I want to change now. Ah, Ignor. Your personality is probably very giving. When you love someone, you give so much that you don't even bother to check if you're receiving anything in return. You never think about the balance between giving and receiving. When we don't establish the balance between giving and receiving at first, even if we feel good for a while, after some time we realize that we are completely drained. Sometimes we think that giving a lot to someone will be good for them, but it doesn't do any good for ourselves or for the other person. First, you need to be aware of this. For example, take a flower. Giving it too much water is not good for it. On the contrary, it's actually harmful to it. But with good intentions, you might think, oh, I didn't give the flower water today. Take an orchid, for example, right? It shouldn't be watered every day. Let me water it today as well. When we say, poor thing, it hasn't been watered at all today, what are we actually doing? In fact, we're harming it. So, in one of your patterns, you always do it with good intentions. But because you do what the other person is supposed to do, they stop fulfilling their own responsibilities. Because that's just how people are. If someone else does what a person is supposed to do, they immediately stop doing it themselves. And then they act as if it's your responsibility. First, become aware of this. Doing good for someone else doesn't always mean you're actually helping them. You need to realize this first. and step by step this too. This awareness needs to gradually lead you toward change. Reflect on these questions yourself as well. Yes, Talion said, in which city in Germany will the in-person vision event take place? Our friends will inform you about that again, but I think it will be held in Düsseldorf and the surrounding area, but you'll receive the exact information later. That's just what we discussed. Yes. Inchi said, sometimes I try a lot of things and at some point I feel scattered. How can we not distinguish what a person should let go of and what they should continue in order to realize their true potential? Now, when we start something and leave it unfinished, our brain always keeps that file open. This is called the Zeigarnik effect, and our brain gets stuck like that. For some people, this is more dominant. For example, as a personality, I can do many things at the same time. I can keep them going. Those open files don't bother me much, but for some people, they absolutely need to finish something before moving on. When there are 2 or 3 open files, they can't make progress. So that means your way of thinking, your way of working is like that. You need to do something, finish it, and then move on. Apparently, you can't make progress in the other way. We need to discover our own structure, our own character, and our own tendencies. I do the same in my own team, in our teams. In our seminar team, in our camp team, I always start this journey assuming that no one will change. Instead of trying to change someone, I focus on bringing out whatever is strong in their essence. That's why I look and say, for example, Becker listens to our game very well. That's his area. I don't insist on making him talk. For example, our hunter Bura gives very good information. So I use him in the direction of providing information. I don't insist that he should go and listen to someone. In other words, we also need to discover our own strengths and move forward in those areas where we are strong. Instead of trying to fix our weaknesses, we should make our strengths even stronger. At this point, what will benefit us the most? Then is what will provide us with the most benefit. Aishnur, can you answer my question? She said again. Let me see where she asked it. What should an effective coaching process be like for you? What is an effective way to use silence? The 5-minute exercise I explained is the most effective way. What should an effective coaching process be like? The other person should be able to open up. The other person should be able to step out of formality and pour their heart out to you. Because the main point here is not so much what they tell you, but that they feel safe with you. If they feel safe, only then will the information you provide reach their subconscious. For example, even in that situation, what do we say? In a relationship, this could be a friendship or a life journey or a partnership with a life companion. What is the most important thing? It's trust. If you trust the other person, you start to open up, right? It's the same in the coaching process as well. If the other person starts to trust you, they both open up, and because they trust you, begin to accept the information you provide. At that point, this is very important. Yes, teacher, should we coach on every subject or should we choose a specific field? Aishi asked this. This again depends on you. If your mindset is focused on certain topics, for example, student coaching or athlete coaching, you should choose that. You don't necessarily have to get involved in every subject. I have a broader perspective. For example, in the past, I have done student coaching as well as athlete coaching. For example, one of the athletes I worked with became a world champion in karate. I have also helped people in other fields, but this is already my lifestyle. Normally, I am already interested in sports. I watch interviews with athletes. Then suddenly I find myself reading the Masnavi. This is my style. But if you are someone who is progressing in just one area, it would be more important and valuable for you to choose that area. Yes, I think we've finished our questions. It was a pleasant and nice conversation. I would like you to reflect a bit on this conversation and also work a little on the PowerPoint file we sent you. Ask these questions to your friends and acquaintances around you to reinforce them. If you don't immediately put into practice the knowledge you've learned, that knowledge will be forgotten and lost. That's why we should put it into practice right away. And hopefully we'll meet face to face as soon as possible, have a conversation and share each other's positive energy, right? Let's wish for that. As they say, I say this with the hope that we can share our smiling energies with each other. Take very good care of yourselves. I'm so glad you exist, my fellow travelers. I say goodbye.